there, my name is Susie Sauer, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how to use Moodle for assessment in drama. So some of our other examples we've shown you have been geared more towards sort of summative tasks or graded tasks or quizzes or those kinds of activities. I wanted to explore how Moodle might be used in a more practical-based subject in a formative way. In drama, of course, we have summative tasks, and we have tasks that might be considered, more formal, but there's also a lot of formative activity, and I'm trying to build a lot more sort of peer assessment and self-assessment into my classes as well. And one of the great things about Moodle is there are a lot of opportunities to use Moodle in that way. So I'm going to be looking today at how to use Moodle to really encourage class discussion and peer and self-assessment, as well as using it as a formative assessment tool. So today I'm going to be looking at an example that comes from a devising theater unit. So devised theater is devised theater means that you're not working from an existing script, but instead the students are creating theater on their own. It's usually based on an idea that they're interested in exploring, but sometimes it can be hard for students to come up with an idea that is going to sustain their interest and also make a really effective piece of theater. So I'm going to look at how Moodle might be able to lay some of the groundwork to make those discussions work better. So the first thing I'm going to do is just double check that in my Moodle I've got the editing turned on. I do, and I'm going to go ahead and add an activity. There's a lot of different kinds of activities you can add. We've given you a couple examples here, but I want to look particularly at the forum activity. So the forum activity is the one that I'm going to use to just enable my students to chat with each other about the project. I'm going to go ahead and give this forum a name so that the students can identify which forum we're looking at. And there's a spot here to include a description so that students will have a good idea about what you're actually looking for. In terms of what kind of response you're hoping to get from them. That can be quite important just to sort of guide their process. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. So at the beginning of a devising theater unit, usually I will ask the students to make a pitch about what kind of idea they'd like to explore through their making of theater. That can range anything from a current issue that they'd like to make a comment on, a style of theater that they'd like to explore, a particular historical figure, or an opinion that they'd like to express. What can be difficult is soliciting those ideas in a way that's really empowering for the students, and at the same time encouraging them to think deeply about each other's ideas and to push that discussion on. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this forum as a way of laying the groundwork for that discussion. So in this description here, I'm going to ask my students to write their pitch and to post it ahead of time. The idea being that, sometimes when we are forced to write something down and to really think about how we want to phrase it, it sort of helps us to encapsulate our ideas more clearly, but also in being able to read a classmate's pitch and really think about what that classmate is saying, I'm really hoping to elicit a deeper response from my students as they comment on each other's work. So in this description here, I'm just explaining to the students what kinds of information I'd like them to include in their pitch. I'm trying to keep it as open-ended as possible, so I'm not limiting them. Part of the joy of devising theater is the empowerment it brings for students. But I also know with my students in particular, sometimes if they don't think they're being graded on something, they don't spend as much effort on it. So I do make sure to include in the instructions here that formative feedback is going to be given. Now the nice thing about Moodle is there are all of these formatting options at the top here. You can change a lot of things, and to be honest, I am a formatter. I like to make things look pretty. I like to add links or embed images or change colors, and you can do all of that with Moodle, which is pretty cool. So we've got an option here to display the description on the course page. I'm actually not going to do that, mostly because I don't like to clog up my course page with a lot of text. I find that my students don't engage as well with it, so I'm going to leave that one off. You can select whether someone how they're able to post here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to set it so that each pupil can add their own discussion post, and that way I think it's going to be easier to categorize them and for each pupil to find each other's work and to sort of nest the comments below the original post. I think that's going to be easiest to organize, and as you know, when I go in to have a look at what everyone's done, it's also going to be a lot easier for me to sort of track the discussion if everything is sort of subdivided. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that option. There's a lot of other options here that we can have a look at. It's nice to be able to allow students to attach external files or images. You can set a limit on that. I'm just going to leave it at the default. Although, of course, if I was asking my students to include possible stimulus material in their pitches, I might sort of up the allowance here, but that's something I would actually ask them to gather a little bit later once they've sort of decided what they wanted to focus on. So here we've got subscription information. So I'm not going to make this optional because I want my students to definitely post, so it's definitely not going to be something that's going to be an option for them. So I'm going to force that. And in terms of tracking it, I'm just going to leave them at the defaults there. Now you can lock the discussion. You can close it, and depending on whether you wanted that discussion to continue throughout the unit, that would be up to you. Now, I think that I would ask my students to start working on these pitches about a week before I would like them to start the face-to-face discussions. And so I'm going to set my settings to close the discussion and also block any more entries for a week after I set the discussion up. My hope is that would allow the students enough time at home to really be thinking deeply about what their classmates have posted and how they might be able to further those ideas or even find links to their own ideas. So that would be my goal. Now you can set a forum up to be graded. I'm not going to in this case because, like I mentioned earlier, I don't want my students focused on a numerical grade. I will give them formative feedback, but I definitely don't want them focusing on, trying to attain a certain level in that sense. So I'm actually going to avoid that in this case, but that is an option. There are a lot of other sort of default settings in terms of how it's organized. I'm going to keep most of that pretty simple. Now, in terms of restricting the access, actually my courses are restricted already to the pupils who are enrolled, so I don't have to further restrict this conversation, although you could, and that might be interesting if you wanted to give a space for certain groups to keep the discussion going without the other group's digital presence. So, and there we go. We just click Save and Display, and there's our lovely forum ready to go for students' use. So I'm really hoping that this kind of sort of precursor to the in-class discussion might really help to deepen the discussions my students are having about their work and provide them a really meaningful opportunity to not only reflect on what they're doing, but also to really feed into each other's creative ideas and to push one another even before I give them their formative feedback. I think it's a nice way to sort of augment more a formal assessment style, and a good way to track creative ideas using digital methods that students are kind of familiar with. So hopefully that will be helpful for you, and I'm really interested to know what you think if you choose to use this idea. Thank you very much.